I want to welcome everyone to the last webinar in our three-part series on American Job Center Certification and Section 188, a window of opportunity to impact equal opportunity policy and practice for people with disabilities. I can't say that enough, and I think that really says it all, and that's what we're hoping you'll walk away with today. The creation of this three-part series is a collaboration between two national technical assistance centers, LEAD and DEI, and the three state workforce examples that have been an integral part of the collaborative effort. I am Laura Glenick and serve as the project manager for the Disability Employment Initiative's Technical Assistance Team, which is a collaboration between National Disability Institute and its for-profit NDI Consulting, and I get the pleasure of serving as the facilitator for today's presentation. So before we begin, we're going to go over some logistics regarding the webinar platform. The audio is being broadcast through your computer. Please make sure your speakers are turned on or your headphones are plugged in. You can control the audio via the audio broadcast panel, and you can see an example of what that panel looks like on the screen. If you accidentally close the panel, you can reopen by going to the Communicate menu, which is located on the top menu bar, and choosing Join Audio Broadcast. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer, or if you prefer to listen by phone, you may dial the phone numbers listed here. It's 1-416-655-001, and once you dial that, you will be prompted to enter a meeting code, and that number is 667-870-947, and you will not need to enter an attendee ID when you're prompted. Just press the pound key. Real-time captioning is being provided in the Media Viewer panel, which appears in the lower right corner of the web platform. If you want to make the Media Viewer panel larger, you can minimize other panels above it, like the chat, Q&A, and/or the participants. As we mentioned during Part 2, today's presentation will include time for questions and answers. And we imagine we won't be able to get to all of the questions, so we will remind you throughout the webinar, when you exit today and take the post-webinar survey, you'll have the opportunity to add questions that we were not able to get to or others that you thought of in the comment section. Throughout the webinar, please use the chat or the Q&A boxes found on the right-hand side of the screen to send your questions to the host and presenters. If you're joining using the audio only and you're not logged into the webinar, you may ask questions or submit comments to me by email. My email is lgleck@ndi-inc.org. We also know that many of you joined us during Parts 1 and 2, and you might already have questions in mind. So please feel free to start submitting them via the chat and/or the Q&A box so we can get them queued up. And if they are specific to one of the three state examples, that's Virginia, California, or Missouri, please include the name of the state along with your submission. And to remind everyone, this webinar is being recorded, and the webinar archive, along with supporting materials, will be placed on the LEAD Center website. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box to send a message to the host, my colleague, Miranda Kennedy, or you may send her an email at mkennedy@ndi-inc.org. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our two guest presenters that have taken us through this three-part series and the technical assistance centers that they represent. They both bring background and expertise from the local, state, and national levels of the workforce, including being part of the Disability Program Navigator Initiative prior to joining the National Technical Assistance Centers. I'll start with Jamie Robinson. She's representing the LEAD Center. She provides technical assistance to the National Workforce System on the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, Equal Opportunity and Non-Discrimination provisions. She served on the technical assistance team at National Disability Institute under multiple disability employment initiatives for the U.S. Department of Labor. And as a member of the deaf community, Jamie is fluent in American Sign Language and leads efforts to expand communication access nationwide. So let's learn a little bit about the LEAD Center. Better known as the National Center on Leadership for the Employment and Economic Advancement of People with Disabilities, the LEAD Center represents a collaborative of disability, workforce, and economic empowerment organizations. It's led by National Disability Institute with funding from the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy. The mission of the LEAD Center is to advance sustainable individual and systems-level change that results in improved, competitive, integrated employment and economic self-sufficiency outcomes for individuals across the spectrum of disability. Joining Jamie is Brian Ingram. He represents the Disability Employment Initiative, also known as DEI. And for the past 8 years, he has been part of the DEI Technical Assistance Team, providing support to grantees, the Public Workforce System, and the National DEI Program Office. Brian has extensive experience working with WIOA and previously WIA Title I providers at the state, local, and center levels, focusing on access for job seekers with disabilities. And so let's learn a little bit about the Disability Employment Initiative. The purpose is to expand the capacity of the American Job Centers to improve education, training, and employment outcomes of youth and adults with disabilities, including individuals with significant disabilities, through a career pathways framework in support of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. DEI is administered by the U.S. Department of Labor's Employment and Training Administration, who also oversees the DEI TA Center contract, and it's jointly funded with the Office of Disability Employment Policy. And so with that, before we get started, we're really happy to have leadership joining us today from ODEP and ETA. And I'm going to turn it over to first Chris Button, who is the supervisor with Workforce Systems Policy with ODEP, and then she will pass it on to David Jones, who is a workforce analyst, the Office of Workforce Investment with Employment and Training Administration. So Chris and David, we're glad you joined us, and I'd like to turn it over to you to welcome everybody.
Thank you so much, Laura. And on behalf of ODEP and the Secretary of Labor, I want to thank everyone for being here today. A special thanks to our panelists from Virginia, California, and Missouri, and of course to our awesome staff from the DEI TA Center and also the LEAD Center. Laura, you said it so well when you said that there is a window of opportunity to impact the WIOA, and that is so true. And Section 188 and its non-discrimination and equal opportunity provisions are really important for making the important provisions of WIOA a reality. So I think that what we're going to be hearing about is the innovation that the state leaders have been displaying in their states to help make everything come together using 188 as a framework. And I, for one, am really excited to hear about it today. So I want to thank everyone again. I also want to thank my colleague who's here with me from the Employment and Training Administration, David Jones. And David, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And on behalf of the Employment and Training Administration, we would like to join ODEP in welcoming everyone to today's webinar. ETA would like to thank both the DEI and LEAD Center for facilitating a peer-to-peer exchange on the provision of Section 188 and the certification process. We do hope that the innovative ideas that surfaced during today's call can be a spark in how you maximize inclusion within your state in support of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris and David. And with that, with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to get our presentation started.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you, Chris and David, for all of your support and your team's support from ODEP and ETA. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, LEAD and DEI have been engaged in WIOA implementation for a while now, and with that focus on disability and accessibility. And through the work that we've done, our TA centers have learned so much from all of you firsthand how Section 188 and the AJC certification offer this kind of incredible window of opportunity to expand both physical and programmatic accessibility and employment outcomes. Compliance with Section 188 and engagement in AJC certification has broadened under WIOA. Core partners share responsibility for aspects of service delivery and so of Section 188. And Section 188 is that part of the regulatory framework for the AJC certification criteria and processes. And we've learned that equal opportunity officers and vocational rehabilitation agencies and staff are engaged in AJC certification and are serving in capacities of subject matter experts around compliance and accessibility. And we've also learned that AJCs and partners need more resources and strategies to effectively implement both 188 and the AJC certification process, which is kind of why we've done this webinar and have brought some states to the table to share what they've done. During part 2 of the webinar series, we heard from 3 different states, and we reflected on various topics and questions, and here are a few here. How was WIOA state leadership engaged in the AJC certification process in Virginia, California, Missouri? How were they effective and what were the challenges? And what were the reasons that these states chose to focus on state-level activities to drive their AJC certification processes? And do these reasons reflect the current reality in your states and regions? And are the cross-partner relationships described by these states similar to those that exist in your state and region? And if not, would they be beneficial, and how could they be developed? So that brings us to today's webinar, part 3, Achieving 188 Compliance, Key Strategies and Actions from Policy to Practice. And here's what we hope to achieve. We'd like to contrast and compare the examples of states provided in this webinar, Virginia, California, Missouri, to consider how these examples may help to identify opportunities in your states and regions to enhance and expand Section 188 compliance using the AJC certification process mandated under WIOA. We want to use the information and examples in part 1 and 2 of the training series to reflect on the progress of other states and regions. And lastly, we want to ask questions directly of these states so that we can think about possible action steps around 188 and the AJC certification. So as a high-level recap, here are some of the key strategies that each state discussed around implementation of AJC certification with Section 188 as the overarching framework. We heard from Virginia. They shared how instrumental their state cross-partner and cross-title task force was in leveraging subject matter experts across the spectrum of disabilities, as well as tapping into the perspectives at the policy level and the program and the field level to ensure that policies are operationalized and actionable around accessibility. And they also highlighted VR's leadership role in all of this work and how the promising practices that have been developed from their DEI are being expanded to the statewide workforce system. We then heard from California, who shared their state's 2 levels of AJC certification, baseline and hallmarks of excellence, as a way for AJCs to meet realistic and attainable criteria, while also having the opportunity to highlight where they may be exceeding the expectations. The hallmarks of excellence also identify areas in need of improvement and help to motivate the AJCs to recognize that the systems need to always work towards improvement. This process doesn't end with their certification. It is ongoing. Missouri shared their history around building their equal opportunity and non-discrimination plan from the ground up, with funding allocated to these regions and application of the best practices in the Section 188 Disability Reference Guide as their blueprint for expanding access and outcomes. Missouri also emphasized how their close working relationship between the State Equal Opportunity Office and the State VR has been critical to the progress made around staff training, AJC certification processes, and also help to foster partnerships on the local level. So with that, Brian, I am going to hand it over to you as I pull up some more of the themes that were discussed by the Virginia team to start the Q&A.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. Hello, everyone. This is Brian. And for those of you who attended our earlier presentations, thanks for sticking with us all the way to part 3. And for anyone who joined us today, welcome. As Jamie stated, the idea of this presentation today is to give you, the audience, the opportunity to have a dialogue with your peers from the states that have been highlighted during the series. And our first state on deck today is Virginia. So in the spirit of informed debate, let's check out these highlights very quickly of the presentation that Virginia shared with us in part 2. So as we look at this, we have key strategies and action steps. So the first one is actually my favorite. Access to AJCs is everyone's responsibility, and access to AJCs is for everyone. This was the basic philosophy that drove the process, and it's the reason they did everything they did. And what did they do? Well, they created an action-oriented accessibility task force at the state level. This task force contained both policy perspective and practical application. Operational experience was at the table as well, and its focus was on access outcomes. So that they used diverse cross-partners and cross-partner relationships to provide critical expertise and technical assistance around these issues. They saw WIOA as an opportunity for all of the titles to increase their access. VR was a strategic leader across this process and therefore across all WIOA programs and partners. And finally, they took advantage of their DEI project, which had been implementing promising practices that could be leveraged statewide as examples, as operational examples of what access could look like. Okay, hopefully this is going to help jog your memories for those of you who attended part 2 and catch you up if you didn't, if this is your first one. So as a facilitator of this discussion, my next responsibility is to introduce our panelists from Virginia, who have so generously agreed to be here with us today. So, here they are. Our first panelist is Aida Pacheco. She's the Special Projects Coordinator with the Virginia Community College System the Workforce Development Services Division. Aida, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hola, everyone.
Welcome, Aida. Secondly, we have Constance Green, who is the WIOA Adult and Dislocated Worker Program State Coordinator under Title I. Constance, are you with us?
Yes, sir. Thanks, y'all.
Hey, well, good to have you. And finally, we have Sinclair Hubbard, and she is the Disability Employment Initiative, DEI, Project Lead Disability Resource Coordinator. She works for the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services, which is Virginia State Vocational Rehabilitation Agency. Sinclair, are you with us too?
Brian, I'm front and center.
Well, welcome. Okay, we're about ready for the questions here, but before we begin, let's review the protocol one more time so our conversation's smooth and effective. So here's the guideline for submitting questions, and it's pretty simple. Please use the chat box or Q&A box to send any questions you might have, and let us know who you are, where you're from, and who, if anyone in particular, your question is presented to. And then we are going to direct the questions accordingly and let the panelists respond. Our all-seeing staff is going to be sure to unmute your lines to allow you to respond and contribute if the panelists ask you a question in the process of answering yours. Now remember, the presentation part of this section is now complete. So if we don't receive questions from you, our esteemed audience, this is going to be a very short session. You know what, I'm not worried about that because I know there's questions out there, and I know this because we received quite a few of them after we completed part 2. And for the sake of a smooth transition, I'm going to start the Q&A off today with one we received after part 2 in order to give you all a chance to submit the questions that you might have today. Okay, so here's our first question for Virginia, and I'd like to direct it at Connie. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so here's the question. It's clear from your Part 2 presentation that the Accessibility Task Force made great use of the expertise and insights offered by disability-specific providers other than VR as it engaged in the development of your AJC certification process. How did you decide which disability partners to outreach to and include in the task force? What were their roles? And what was the benefit to these different organizations to participate on the task force or with the task force?
Okay, well, I'll start with the first part of that. So we decided in Virginia to include our existing partners. We have the Department for the Blind and Vision Impaired and Deaf and Hard of Hearing, who had previously participated on the state level Executive Management Committee for multiple DOL disability employment grants. We then expanded beyond that to include other partners. We included the Centers for Independent Living and our EEO officers for Titles I and Title III to kind of round out the task force and make it more comprehensive and diversified. So really the diverse representatives on the task force has garnered a lot of cross-agency buy-in to provide key recommendations for state policy development, for helping leadership direction, and focus on trainings in support of WIOA and implementation of Section 188. So really the efforts of the task force have focused on improving accessibility for the one-stop system itself, that we including all of our titles, and they focused also on services for job seekers with disabilities. So it's kind of been a two-pronged approach there. And the benefits for participation in our task force, other than networking with great people, just kidding, really they've become an official part of the AJC certification process. They actually assisted in developing and vetting the criteria for the program and programmatic accessibility portion of our certification tool in Virginia. They participated in the review of submitted certification documentation. We had a quote-unquote validation process where the state agencies pulled together and did a review of both the submissions and the supporting documentation and helped to validate that certification. And we had the members participate in on-site visits to do some of this review at the one-stops. So they got hands-on experience walking into the centers as a team and looking at accessibility as a team in each of our comprehensive one-stop centers, and we will be doing it again for our affiliate centers as well. So hopefully that answers your question, Brian.
Oh boy, does it. Thank you. That was a great response. So can I throw one on top of it just because I'm here and it occurred to me?
Sure.
Do you think that this kind of a process kind of deepened relationships and made them more helped to make them function better? Do you think these partners are going to be more effective at using the services and referring to the services in the AJCs?
I think they definitely, it has been. That taking it from the theoretical policy level down to the operational level and implementing this certification, it started a ball rolling in Virginia. We've really started having some more conversation about accessibility at a deeper level beyond just, drag out the tape measures the door wide enough kind of deal. We're talking about what does it mean to look at your policies and your procedures and make them truly accessible. How is it that we've partnered together? We've definitely built a relationship across all of these agencies. Oh, yes, definitely. Sorry, Aida was writing notes to me while I was talking. So our partner, especially one of our partners with the, I shouldn't use the acronym, Department for Blind and Vision Impaired and hard of hearing, for deaf and hard of hearing, they've really been very active in providing technical assistance as well. And when we went out as teams to each of the centers, we actually made connections and we started building those relationships for the technical assistance follow-up because people have questions at the AJCs. They were like, yeah, sure, we implement it, and we know we're trying to be as helpful as possible, but they are definitely, they're willing to ask for more help, and that's where having these partner teams come out and be able to make that one-on-one connection with the state agencies, especially if they're not physically located in the center all of the time, was super useful.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'll ask Laura if there's any additional questions that have come in.
Brian, I'm sorry, I was in the Q&A and I couldn't get back. There is a quick
Lost in the Q&A.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. The question is, what type of help is available for the deaf and with cochlear implant when the phone use is very difficult?
Ooh, and that, as I am actually just a Title I person, I don't know the exact answer to that, but if someone can email me the contact information, I'll put you in touch with our expert, Gary, in our DBVI agency, and he can probably answer that in much more detail that would be useful than I could.
Great. And Billy, please, when you exit in the post-webinar survey, if you add that to the comment section, that will be part of our FAQ. So Brian, I think that we are ready to move on to California.
Okay, we will. So, okay, on to California. And again, let's start with a review of the topics that California covered in Part 2. So the key strategies and action steps. Baseline criteria is not subjective, it's compliance. And I think that's referring to that first level of AJC certification around Section 188, the baseline criteria. Secondly, the hallmarks, which is the second level, identify areas where AJCs are exceeding expectations and try to identify a basis for continuous improvement. California is trying to ensure that policy includes realistic and sustainable criteria. Again, talking about operationalizing things. Finally, every element of the hallmarks of excellence asks local areas to identify and write areas of improvement. So there's a lot of engagement with the local level and with the providers. And finally, the goal is to recognize that the system can always improve and that there is a continuous improvement framework in place. Okay, now that I've reviewed our minds on the California presentation, let's introduce our colleague from California. And the first thing I have to say is that there are two names on here, but we only have one person in attendance. That's Carlos Bravo. He is the WIOA directives with the local and state board liaison for the California Workforce Development Board. Now, Morgan wanted to be here with us today, but we have been informed that she has taken maternity leave. So that's a pretty good excuse. Are you with us, Carlos? Carlos, you might be on mute. Okay, I'm not hearing Carlos.
It looks like he might not be synced up, Brian, so maybe we can move on to Missouri and then come back.
Why don't we move on to Missouri and then we'll come back? That sounds great.
Okay.
What I want to interject really quickly, he's on the phone. He is on the phone, so I'm going to go ahead and do a quick unmute all the lines if you'd like. Actually, we can't do that.
Okay, we're good.
Give me a moment while I work on this. Thanks.
Okay, why don't we move on? Then, Jamie, I'll take you up on your offer.
Okay, sounds good. All right, moving on to Missouri and kind of a recap or snapshot of what they discussed. They talked a lot about a commitment to partnership building, a long-term commitment between workforce and VR. And they've talked a lot about how building that relationship before WIOA really helps their relationship moving forward under the new regulation. The statewide training used the 188 Promising Practices Guide. We have a link to that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but they basically had to start from scratch and build up their non-discrimination and EO policy, and they looked to this 188 guide as the framework and the blueprint. They talked about empowering local regions with a grant for Section 188 EO activities. We got a lot of questions about that in Part 2, and also ways to support, better support serving people with disabilities. They talked about VR supporting the AJC staff and partners so that they could feel more comfortable and confident in serving customers with disabilities. Also disability subcommittees and the role that they play. And also, actually, Virginia just talked about this, and here's another one in Missouri where, you know, VR and the partners are part of that review team for the AJC certification process, which really helps build a greater awareness about how the one-stops function. So with us today, we do have one of the panelists from the Missouri team, Yvonne Wright. She's the Director of Workforce Development and Business Outreach for Missouri's VOC Rehab. Yvonne, are you there?
I am here.
Hello. Okay, great. So we had a lot of questions come in for your team, but I'm going to pull out one specific to VR since you're here with us. So here it is. Hearing about the close kind of everyday relationship between Title I and VR is really impressive. Would you be willing to share what you see as the benefits of deepening such a relationship and how it applies to WIOA implementation generally and AJC certification specifically? And finally, says our state is in the early stages of partnering with VR, and so how would you recommend we take steps to strengthen it?
Okay, I'll start with the first part of your question, and you know, the simplest way for me to equate this is with any relationship that you develop, and I'll equate it to marriage. Hopefully that will be a good analogy for most of us. You know, you've got to really get to know a person and understand their strengths and their weaknesses and what they bring to the table. And to me, the more you firm up your relationship, the easier that all parts of this implementation become. You know, I'm going to say something kind of corny. You end up finishing each other's sentences. The enrichment of my knowledge in VR of the workforce system in general, of my AEL partners, of my even our services for the blind agency, our TANF partners, which are part of our partnership, and of course our Title I and Title III, it just makes it makes it so much easier just to be able to even do what we need to do. You know, if we have this communication on a daily basis, and I do mean daily. I'm actually sitting in a hotel right now. I'm president of our Missouri Workforce Association, and right now downstairs our EO officers are meeting, and I just had lunch with one of our EO officers. We're getting ready to have our big workforce conference. We're very tied at the hip, and I guess the more you know someone and you understand their world, to me, it's going to enhance everything you do. And of course, what we're talking about here is, you know, implementing Section 188 and how we can just work best to serve all of our job seekers, including those with disabilities. And to me, it's just about building and firming up that relationship. As to your second question, how to kind of get in there, I jotted down a few things. Some of these are going to seem so, you know, just kind of makes really big sense to say this, but honestly, just inviting VR to the table and making sure that VR is a part of what you're doing. And this is where it gets really fun. Think beyond the compliance. Think beyond, okay, it's a disability thing, so we need to involve VR. It should be it's a workforce thing, so we need to involve VR. We want to be considered as equal partners at the table moving forward. That's not always easy. I know if you tried that and maybe VR doesn't seem receptive, but bring them in on you know, every aspect of things. I'm involved in things that have nothing to do with disabilities. However, every time I come to the table, I bring that aspect, I bring that expertise, and I bring that perspective so I can make sure when we're having conversations. I'll give you another example. For this workforce conference, I was reached out to by our workforce executive director who was actually on the previous webinar, and he's like, Yvonne, we have a communications department. We'd love to come just to interview people and do videos of how the conference is going and how the attendees are. And I said, that's great, but any video you do, would you please make sure it's closed caption? You know what? I hadn't thought of that. Yep, we absolutely will. It's something we need to be thinking of. It's things like that that just, you know, evolve because you're part of that partnership. And then finally, I recommend getting in VR's world a little bit. Maybe try to attend events that VR has. Try to see what kinds of things they have going on. VR has we have a VR conference, a rehab conference in Missouri that workforce folks can be a part of. And so it's a matter of just getting in each other's worlds and really trying to have an understanding. And to me, those help deepen the relationship.
Great. Thank you so much. It's about going out for lunch, right?
Yeah, and dinner.
Great. Okay, great. So I'm going to turn it to Laura, see if any questions have come in.
Jamie, I'm going to suggest going back to California. I'm going to look at this. So why don't we move forward? Carlos should be connected back to the webinar.
Okay, sounds good. Brian, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jamie. And I'd just like to emphasize again, please submit some questions, folks. This is an opportunity that won't present itself often. To have these folks on the line and have them available to be questioned is a great opportunity. So let's see. Carlos, are you with us?
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can. All right.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's so weird because we did a test call earlier. Anyways, yeah.
Hey, there's no accounting for technology sometimes. And I think where we left off is we were mentioning that your colleague Morgan is on maternity leave, so congratulations to her if you get the opportunity.
Yeah. Happy reason.
That's a great excuse. There's no better excuse.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, again, I hope you guys are writing up your questions for Carlos. But to be consistent, let's look at those guidelines again. So please use your chat box or your Q&A box to send any questions you have. Let us know who you are, where you're from, and who, if anyone in particular, the questions presented to. And then Laura's going to direct the questions accordingly and the panelists will respond. Your lines will be unmuted if needed to let you respond and talk with the panelists as they're in the process of answering your question. Now, Carlos, we also received some questions for California after the Part 2 presentation, and I'd like to start the dialogue with one of them. Hopefully to give the audience some time to submit some questions. So here's my question for you, and this is from, based on what you were talking about in Part 2. Here's the question. One of the things we encountered as our state engaged in developing AJC certification procedures based on Section 188 compliance is that time was a huge factor, and in parentheses, not enough of it. We needed to get our AJC certified on a tight timeline or face the possibility of closing them until certification could be established. So I think this is the actual question part. Is this part of the reason California moved forward with multiple levels of certification? And if so, were there any additional benefits to doing that, and what were they?
Yeah, so that's actually a pretty big question. So I would say, to answer your question directly, yes. Part of the reason that we moved forward with the multiple levels of certification was to address the timeline issue. But what I would also say is that for California, this has been an extremely comprehensive process, and this being WIOA implementation. So, we've worked along the way very closely with our VR and DHS, Department of Health Services representatives for the MOUs, for the local and regional plans, and the state plan, along as well as the operator and career service provider, AJC operator and career service provider procurement process. So the reason I bring all those things up is because as we all know, they're all very much interwoven, and especially with the AJC certification. So for those previous iterations, those previous compliance timelines we had to meet, we also did sort of like a tiered process. So like specifically with the MOU, we did an MOU phase 1 and MOU phase 2, and we sort of have what we're calling now the MOU phase 3, and that was very successful for us as a state to help all the local areas meet their timelines. So, so we thought that, this would be a good approach for the AJC certification as well, specifically with the 188 compliance, the 167 compliance, migrant season farm workers, things like that. Those are very important considerations that we have to look at when we're doing certification in California.
Okay, thank you very much.
That was a long answer, I know.
That was a long question, Carlos. I think you did a pretty good job. That's great, because, that's definitely something we've heard from a lot of states, which is we'd like to put something more comprehensive in place, but at the same time, we can't really afford not to certify these centers. So I think it was really fascinating to hear that answer, why you did it and how it was helpful. So Laura, are there any additional questions for California that have come up in the queue since we were talking?
Not specific to California. I have a question that's directed to all, though.
Well, perhaps we should move to the general question and answer period then.
Okay. So I will pose this to Jamie and Brian and let you work with the state. So this is to all again. What efforts did you or would you like to have seen from the local level to facilitate state-level actions? That's a really good question.
Oh, that's an excellent question.
Yeah. I don't know, Brian. I think I would direct that to Sinclair from Virginia.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. Well, I want to say one thing that we did with our accessibility task force is we included the president of the workforce board directors, and one of the things that she repeatedly said when we were conducting our task force meetings with Jamie and sometimes Brian included, was she said, you all need to do your trainings with all staff, We don't want to have the trainings be just VR staff gets trained and then the other staff gets Title I gets trained, because they're a team and we want them all to be done that way. And so we have followed up with that. Our Employment Commission Title III group, EEO officer, conducted a training, and we then broadcast it out via video teleconferencing to 12 other locations to 37 other people that were representing all 4 titles. So we took that information and that came from the local level and used it from a state level perspective to conduct those trainings. Is there something else you were thinking of, Jamie?
No, I need to have the local perspective, so thank you.
Well, and let me just add, when Connie and other folks went out and did those site visits, they also gathered information from the local level in terms of they wanted the teams to come back. We want more technical assistance. So I think that effort really started developing a top-down relationship that we really didn't have before. People just got their directives, but they didn't have that hands-on experience with the team coming in.
Great. You know, I have a follow-up. This is Jamie. I have a follow-up question that kind of relates to this that had come in previously, and it was about regions that or states that do implement the DEI, but only in certain regions, and that, you know, how can those regions help to ensure that the practices that they are focused on around accessibility and disability can be expanded statewide?
Well, this is Sinclair again. In Virginia, we passed that kind of information up because the VR Assistant Commissioner is on the WIOA implementation team, as well as chairing the Career Pathways Work Group. And so we work on those efforts to try to get that information shared and make it be across the board. And the other thing we did with our DEI grants is we had an executive management committee, and we had the previous workforce directors from the so let's just say that the areas that were not being served this time still participated on those committee meetings so that they could hear what the best practices were moving forward.
Great,
Jamie,
thank you
this
for
is
that.
Aida from Virginia.
Yes, Aida, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. At one time, we had an executive order that required the partners to come together and hold regional orientation on working with businesses, and you know, just showing them about how to make accommodations. We also we put together a toolkit that outlined different resources for follow-up. And so I thought that was really helpful in doing that. So if other states might be interested in maybe following that, doing something like that, they can maybe contact us and we can tell them how we went about doing this. We incorporated our regional business employment specialists from DARS, from the RVR agency, and DEI at the time was also involved in helping this out. Sinclair, I don't know if you remember that, I'm sure. And this is a really good way to bring the information locally. We also have our business service solution teams statewide, and our VR business specialists are very much involved in those teams, so that if there's a small business that may need assistance, that's a way to make that connection. I don't know if that answers the question that was asked previously.
Thank you for that, Aida. Okay, I think I'm going to turn it back to Laura.
All right, so I have 2 questions regarding, so let me go to what were some of the biggest challenges while implementing the Accessibility Task Force?
So that would be
Who would like to? Yeah.
Hey, Brian, this is Constance and Aida. Yeah, I just wanted to say that to me, I think when you have a lot of folks trying to bring together, I think sometimes the challenge is just coordinating a date that is, I know it's simple, but it did pose a challenge just trying to get everyone together. And I think the other one was really trying to get the different perspectives and coming to a common ground that ended up producing what I thought was a really good action plan of strategies that we all bought into. But that may be the only two that I can think of. Connie, Sinclair?
I agree.
I totally agree.
There you go.
Okay, so I'm going to give you another question. I'm sorry, I'm not sure which state it goes to, but it's regarding universal referral for services and conducting assessments. So what would you recommend to include as information for assessments and referral processes for WIOA services?
Do we have any volunteers in the panelists?
Sure, I'll take a crack at this one. So I guess ultimately it depends on which, I guess from a California perspective, I'd say it depends on which organization you're representing. So like, let's say, for example, you're not a Title IV representative. So then I would say that in California, you know, we're very much locally driven, locally and regionally driven. And so each local area has their own trainings and types of, you know, assessments and referral processes for WIOA, but at the state level, we try to drive that. And so we try to provide them like some sort of baseline, right? And so that's where we come up with things like the baseline certification matrix, or we develop directives to give local areas a general idea of what the process, you know, should have, but also allowing the flexibility to let people do things, people being the local areas and whichever title you're representing, to do it for what makes best sense in your area. Because, you know, especially in California, we're a very diverse state, and so like different areas, different regions, you know, they have different demographic makeups. And so what may be useful for one local area or region is not going to be necessarily analogous to another region. And so that's a really long way of saying I'd recommend providing some sort of baseline criteria, some sort of like, okay, this is what we need to be like compliant with the feds, but also at the same time understand that each area that you know, that's represented is unique. You know, each physical area is unique, and that we need to be responsive and flexible to be understanding of that.
That's great, Carlos. It sounds like you're setting up a feedback loop too, which is always a good thing between the state and the local levels, so that, you know, you're having a conversation about this. Because you're right, and that's one of the things I often say. It's the great strength and the great weakness of Title I is that there's a lot of regional variation, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Thank you. It's a great answer.
And Brian, this is Sinclair. If I could add, we just participated in a systems integration meeting last week in just with two of our workforce areas, and this whole thing about assessments came up in conversation. And it's one of the things that moving forward we want to talk more about, because everybody has their tried and true kinds of things, but we don't know how that's really effective across titles. So we're going to be looking at that. We're going to be discussing co-enrollments and referrals with you when you come to Virginia in mid-May, and looking at that piece. And then at the state level, we're working on a common screening tool that will have a feedback loop built into it, so that we know that a customer got to VR, or we know the customer got to Title I. And I think that whole process from the top level down is going to help the conversation. It's going to help the collaboration among partners.
And Brian, this is Yvonne from Missouri. I was actually in DC at the end of last week with California some of Sinclair's, probably some of Sinclair's folks, at a WIOA co-enrollment cohort where we talked a lot about referrals, and I think I know exactly what system you're looking at in California. I would just caution folks, when it comes to assessments, I have to echo my colleagues that, you know, it can't really be a one-size-fits-all piece. You know, what we want to avoid is screening out of individuals that might not be your typical test takers, not be your typical have a comfort level with certain assessments, and maybe, you know, we in VR can do a better job of presenting our assessments, you know, on that individual to our partners when it comes to referrals, to make sure that enough information is provided to be able to help that person in the best way that they can. One of the things that I heard a lot about when I was there too was just, you know, trying to come up with something that's universal is very difficult. It just is. And, you know, we really have to depend upon our local regions to, again, develop those relationships so that they have conversations. I think we all said in DC that the ideal situation would be for us to be sitting at the table together with a customer. Now, how often that can actually happen, to make sure that we, you know, can be able to share resources and be able to share information at the same time, that would be ideal. But realistically, we're going to be looking at what we can do to just share information the best we can. And I commend California because I saw some of the things you all are doing.
And Brian, this is Constance in Virginia. Can I tag on to that as well?
Sure.
So it's timely that we're discussing this because in my office, we're actually in the process of rewriting our assessments guidance for the Title I side of the house and making it more inclusive and putting some guiding principles about collaboration with the other partners in doing assessments and not just reassessing or assessing people to death, which is kind of happened some, I'll admit it, in our areas.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I think the more flexibility you can build into assessment procedures, the better off everyone's going to be, right? Because the point was well taken, that not the same assessment is never going to be appropriate for every job seeker. So one size fits all is always going to be challenging.
Well,
okay.
Amy and Brian, I think we're coming to the top of the hour. So maybe we can just run through. Yep, Jamie, I'll turn it back over to you and run through this.
Great, thank you. Well, I think we could continue this conversation and continue to learn a lot from all of you and as well as the participants, but as we kind of told you at the front end of this call, we will be looking at questions coming in from the post-survey. We will be including them in kind of an FAQ document and really documenting a lot of what we've learned through this series, so keep an eye out for that. Here is the Section 188 Disability Reference Guide that we talked about and that Missouri really looked to when they needed to kind of build their non-discrimination plan from the ground level up. And you have the link here. This is a guide that was compiled by the Civil Rights Center, Employment and Training Administration, Office of Disability Employment Policy, with support from the LEAD. I highly encourage you to check it out. It has an incredible amount of promising practices that help your states to meet compliance, to reach accessibility, physical, programmatic, to kind of understand. Even today, a communication access question came up. It usually does. So you can really check out all of the wide variety of promising practices in this guide. We're looking to update it. We're actually in the process right now of updating it, and so that will be hopefully out soon. And you can see that the guide here does not create new legal requirements or change the current requirements. It does not preclude states from devising alternative approaches, and we'd love to hear about those approaches as well. And the adoption of the practices, of course, doesn't guarantee compliance. And then here are the links to the webinar series. If you weren't able to attend them, I would highly recommend, I mean, part 2, you hear directly from the states for an hour and a half on all of these topics. So I would highly recommend, if you need more of a background and how to get started at all of this and how 180 AJC really connects and link, part 1 is a good one for that. And here are some more resources that we'll leave you with from the LEAD Center. Here's our website and just numerous links there. Also, my contact information is there as well, so please do reach out. And then we have DEI resources and ETA, Workforce GPS, just incredible resources here all around everything that we're talking about, disability, accessibility. So we hope that you will check those out. Laura, I'm going to give it back to you for a final word.
So, each time, as I said, when we started the webinar, read the title because I love, again, opportunity. And these 3 sessions in the series have really been a window of opportunity that we hope you're going to take strategies and practices. Again, please, as you exit today, add any more questions or comments in the comment section of the post-webinar survey. We'll put together an FAQ. Can't really thank Jamie and Brian enough. As we said in part 1 and part 2, it was really a labor of love. So together they were working separately, LEAD and DEI, and kind of met in the field and thought this is something great to take to the national level and share. And for Virginia and California and Missouri for joining us on this path and letting people learn from your experiences, what works, what doesn't, the challenges. Really appreciate everybody for doing this. And for Chris with ODEP and David with ETA for the support of being able to share presentations like this and to really help expand the field. So thank you all. We're glad that you joined us for this series. Please do look for the archives when they're posted, along with a frequently asked questions to address questions that were not taken during today and those that we also got. That we'll get in the post-webinar survey. So thank you again, everybody. Enjoy your opportunity and your afternoon, and we look forward to increased access and participation of individuals with job seekers with disabilities in the workforce system because of the great work you'll be doing. Thanks, everybody. This concludes our webinar.